Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're listening to Box F1 Pod. Today, we're prepping for the Singapore Grand Prix, but before we dive into the track and race details, it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1, 2023 F1 news. So we've had some updates of the drivers' lineup. Guan Yu is officially staying at Alfa Romeo for 2023, which makes me really happy. I don't know why I have such a love for Guan Yu, but he's become a staple of my F1 weekends, and I'm so happy we get more bubble tea posts from him, and especially that we get more fits for us to enjoy every single weekend. Can't wait to see what he comes up with next year. Also, my other fave, Yuki, is officially staying at AlphaTauri for 2023, which makes me so happy. I love him, and I really hope that Pierre doesn't move to Alpine for next year so that Gasinoda can stay strong and together, because I don't know if Gasinoda can handle long distance, I think they really need each other's company. Otherwise, I guess Nick and Yuki could be cute, and I'm saying Nick because I honestly can't see anyone else going there. And also, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but that Indy driver that Helmut Marko was like foaming at the mouth over, the FIA rejected the request to make an exception for him, which I think was a good move because they shouldn't be making exceptions. They should be amending the rule to make Indy points equal to those from F2 and F3. So, but unless they're going to make like an overarching rule, they shouldn't be making exceptions for one person. And Dr. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner very quickly switched gears towards Nick de Vries after his performance last week or a couple weeks ago. They're now foaming at the mouth over him and desperately want him. So there's still a very strong chance that Pierre can move over to Alpine and Alpine can make their little French dreams come true. But I guess that's still in the works. In other news, Nicholas Latifi announced that he will not be continuing with Williams in 2023, aka he was fired because Nick outshone him. Literally, Nick de Vries does one race and is now 20th in the driver's standings, and Nicky is 21st. Poor Nicholas Latifi. I really like him. He's very nice. He's a very amicable guy, but he just doesn't belong in F1. He doesn't have what it takes. My bigger question, though, is less who will fill Nicky's seat and more who will fill the cash gap left by Nicholas Latifi's father. Who's going to fund Williams now? Or will Nicholas Latifi's father continue funding the team despite his son no longer having a seat? Which would be a very shitty parent move, and I hope he does not do that. I hope they have other means. But yeah, wondering where that money's coming from now. So the other seats left to fill, obviously the second seat at Williams, the second seat at Alpine, and the second seat at Haas, because Mick's negotiations are still halted. I don't know if Mick's seat at Alpine is dependent on whether Pierre is able to move and then Mick is the second choice, or if he's being considered for Williams. Who knows? Those are the only options. Or he's not in next year, and I highly doubt that's going to happen. I really think that Mick probably has a seat over Daniel Ricciardo because he will probably be willing to make a horizontal move. Is that the word? He'll probably be okay with going to an equal standing team, whereas I doubt Daniel would be willing to drive for Williams. I think he would rather not drive. So that leaves the current drivers without a job next year are Daniel Ricciardo, Mick Schumacher, Nicholas Latifi, if you want to count him, although he has zero shot in hell of getting a seat next year. And then I guess Nick de Vries, who's theoretically a reserve driver, but at this point is almost guaranteed a seat because he just went above and beyond last week. But wouldn't it be cool, if they... obviously, Nick went above and beyond because of extenuating circumstances. Alex got sick, and then, within, a couple hours, Nick had to be in the car and, outperformed anyone's expectations. But wouldn't it be cool if contenders for a particular seat had to fight it out by racing and seeing how they did? Nick put his money where his mouth is and proved to everyone that he's a great driver. What if they made everyone do that? I realize that would mean the current driver would have to sit out 3 races, which is not feasible, but it's a cool concept. They could do it not during an official race. I think it'd be fun. Anyway, other news is F1 announced the schedule for next year, and the calendar features 24 races. That's insane. I can barely keep up this year. I don't know how I'm going to keep up next year. But new features include 3 races in the US, including a night race in Vegas, which we've talked about and sounds awesome. There are also now 6 sprint races on the calendar, and this is the official number moving on after 2023. So they've committed to the sprint race thing. Also, both Monaco and Spa made the cut and are on the calendar, which is exciting because I guess at some point tradition matters. You know, like, no, Monaco and Spa aren't on the calendar because they're a good time. Well, Monaco's a good time. Spa is just rain and depression, and no one's having a good time other than the fries. But, like, they're on there because of historical significance. You know, like, Monaco's not fun for the race. Monaco's fun for everything besides the race. Those are not interesting tracks, but they're there, and I'm really happy they're there because they're important to the sport and to the history of the sport. Also, finally, we're going to China, and I know it used to be on the calendar, but I haven't been to China yet since I started following F1, since I started following the pandemic, so I'm really excited to see what that's like. And we've got a Chinese driver on the grid for the first time ever, so I'm really happy Guan Yu gets a home race, and I get to experience that through his eyes, so that's really fun. Okay, lap 2, the McLaren boys. Quick offshoot though, before I forget. My aunt works for a company that works with McLaren, so she got to meet Zach Brown and got a mini McLaren helmet, and it's so cute, and I touched it, and it was lovely, and I cried. I realize it sounds like I cry about everything, because I talk about crying a lot, but I don't cry at everything, but some things deserve tears, you know? And like touching an official mini McLaren helmet that wouldn't actually fit a driver, but it feels like it's the same thing, was exciting. It was like all smooth and to be fair, there were some excited tears, but there were also some sad tears because one half is Lando's number and the other half is Daniel's number, and Daniel's not continuing with McLaren, and I was kind of sad for Daniel. But my aunt said that Zach Brown was very jovial and nice and fun, and I'm glad to hear that, even though I've kind of fallen out with Zach Brown recently, but I'm glad that he's still that kind of charismatic guy that I always knew he was. I'm just, like, not into some of his recent choices. But still exciting she got to meet Zach Brown. Anyway, moving on. News about Daniel is he low-key announced his cowboy line coming next month. My friend Lexi has already dedicated her entire savings towards this launch. And to be honest, since Daniel is like the driver with the best merch, it's probably a good investment. I'm super stoked, really excited. This is right up his alley. Can't wait to see what it's like. Hopefully it's affordable. In other news, OKX, a crypto trading app, has partnered with McLaren and is featured on their livery for the next 2 races, which gives it like a fun neon look. There are like hot pink accents and they kind of look spray painty, but it makes it look really fun. Which, BWT, take notes. This is how you do hot pink on a sports car. Then again, crypto's cool and water treatment solution is like less cool. So in BWT's defense, they're working with a limited brand, but they could rebrand. There's like a lot of fun stuff you could do with bubblegum pink. They could really sell it. They're just not doing it. Anyway, the reason I'm talking about OKX in the Daniel section was because he was featured in their latest commercial, which was aimed at a British audience, I'm assuming, because everyone was British. And it was this like 2 friends sitting in a pub, and they see an advert on a bus for OKX, and they're like, what's OKX? And then she's like, is it a perfume? And then they cut to like a lady spritzing perfume. And then he's like, no, it's a sports car. And then they cut to Daniel standing on a rotating platform with a McLaren car, the F1 car, with like a cape. And there's a legit honey badger at the wheel, which was cool. It was a double honey badger situation. And then they're like, no, it's not a sports car, it's a rapper. Anyway, they keep going. Sorry for the accent. And then at the end, they're like, oh, it's a crypto trading thing app. I know nothing about crypto. Anyway. But going back to Daniel, I thought OKX sounded familiar, so I looked it up, and they actually announced a partnership with Daniel, like, back in May, which sounds like they, like, made their way to McLaren via Daniel, which I have no facts to back that up. That's just my assumption based on the order these press releases came out. But it sounds to me like Daniel's bringing home the bacon. And if you can't bring home points, at least you can bring home money. Am I right? So good for Daniel. Anyway, let's move on to Lando, who, I'm sorry to say to all my Lando listeners, love Lando, sweet guy, but he's really been grinding my gears recently, and he's just so basic and kind of boring, and he's not, but he kind of is. Like, he's fun. Like, I have a good time with Lando, but also he's kind of basic. And to back this claim up, I'm not just spewing it out, is Lando's recent hobbies, which have been questionable at best. Well, actually, they're not questionable, and maybe that's the problem I'm facing. First up, in his, like, I'm in Singapore post, he debuted that he's now into photography, which is basic. Like, there's nothing wrong with photography, but it's basic. And I don't know if Lando, like, decided one day that golfing and gaming weren't enough as extracurriculars, so he felt the need to expand his list of hobbies. But sure, you can be a photographer. And of course, as every rich person I know who feels an affinity for random hobbies, he's immediately bought a very expensive camera. And he's, like, standing in the middle of the nighttime Singapore road in his little track pants, like, taking a picture of Singapore at night. Nothing wrong with photography. I'm not hating on photography. I'm not hating on Lando, even though this entire spiel has sounded like I've been hating on Lando doing photography. That's it. I'm not hating on Lando or photography. I'm hating on Lando doing photography. It just seems basic. Like, all of these things are alarmingly predictable. For example, his other new hobby, all of these launched in, like, the last 2 weeks, by the way. These haven't been, like, a slow build. These, like, all debuted in the last 2 weeks. Anyway, Lando's other hobby is DJing. Like, what's next? Skateboarding? Like, the worst part of this is not even that Lando took up DJing, which is an issue in and of itself. It's more that he announced this hobby via a picture of him on his private airplane, like, with a turntable, like the DJ equipment thing, you know. Yeah. Like, obviously, we could have seen this coming because of all of his DJ friends, specifically Martin Garrix. But, like, really, Lando? To be fair, Lewis does DJing too, and I also think Lewis is kind of basic sometimes. I'm saying a lot of controversial things. I love Lando, I love Lewis. DJing's cool and all, but, like, why? Why is my question. But I need to segue for a second away from Lando and his questionable choice in hobbies, and I would really like to discuss Martin Garrix for a second. He was recently seen hugging Daniel Ricciardo, which means in September alone, he was pictured with 3 F1 drivers. 3. Max, Lando, and Daniel. Do you know what that makes Martin Garrix? It makes Martin Garrix an F1 groupie. It's giving, like, John Tucker. He's the John Tucker of F1. Like, imagine Max, Lando, and Daniel have no idea Martin's friends with all of them, and then they, like, team up to take him down. Kygo can be, like, the Penn Badgley character. Holy Java Llama! Okay, I don't know if anyone knows that movie, but it was, like, my top favorite film in high school. But This F1 version would be a great film. I personally watch it. But more realistically, I hope that Martin goes like all Taylor Swift on them and dedicates like an entire track to this like friendship triangle, because it's bizarre. Why is Martin Garrix friends with 3 F1 drivers now? Who's next? Who's coming in next? That's my question. Like, this can't, if he went from Max to Lando to Daniel, anyone's fair game. But anyway, let's take a vote. Let's take a vote. Who is Martin Garrix's next victim / friend? All right, lap 3, off the track. George Russell and his girlfriend Carmen are living their best lives. They took their preppy little selves all the way to the Laver Cup and hung out with Roger Federer for his last like hurrah. Nadal and Andy Murray were also there in case one tennis champion wasn't enough for George Russell. But I love that they're doing that. Also, like, their aesthetic is very much, I go to the Laver Cup on the weekends. So great choice in venue. Also, in other news, Charles has developed like a vacation pattern. When he's not driving an F1 car, he's driving a yacht. Like, man of the people, to be honest. He's not just like living yacht life, he's working for it. So I would love to see Charles on Below Deck. That is a crossover that I need to happen. Charles, go on Below Deck, please. You and your entire beautiful family and your very beautiful girlfriend who looks very similar to you, but you guys are cute. You guys need to go on Below Deck and I need to experience it. All right. Another friendship, Mick and Esteban. Esteban turned 26. Happy birthday, Esteban. And Mick was at his birthday dinner / lunch / breakfast. Honestly, it was impossible to tell. The dinner was held in some really bizarre room that had no windows. It was like the back of the restaurant. I don't know. It was like a meeting room. I don't know what it was, but it was weird. And the food looked bonkers. Mick's plate was just like lettuce, bread, and ham by the looks of it, but not in like any coherent format. It wasn't like a sandwich with lettuce or like eggs and bacon or like a croque madame. It was just a pile of random ingredients. Like, Yuki would never. And also, Esteban is supposed to be French. Has he no standards? Why was there just like a hodgepodge of ingredients on Mick's plate? Side note about the French. My French friend who I've talked about before, like a couple of weeks ago, I talked about his very strong opinions about Oscar Piastri, who he calls pastrami, which might have been what Mick was eating. I don't know. Couldn't tell. But my friend is from Paris, and perhaps this has like further solidified my opinions on the French being opinionated / snobby. But he once described the French people as people from Paris and people not from Paris. Also, before anyone gets offended, I'm not using snobby as an insult. Snobby, in my eyes, is basically just a very opinionated person, and it's perfectly acceptable to be snobby as long as your opinions are justified. And for some reason, I always assume that the French opinions are justified. They know what they're talking about. Like, they do. Except for Esteban, who took his friends to, like, I don't know what that was. I can't even come up with a comparison. It was bad. The room looked depressing. What were they doing there? Anyway, I digress. Mick and Esteban also took an adventure together to Disneyland Paris. Unsure if this was for Esteban's birthday or just a fun activity on the weekend. But they both only posted from the Avengers campus, which clearly was like the most exciting part for them. And I love their friendship, and I really, really hope Mick nabs the spot at Alpine. They do seem pretty dead set on Pierre completing their Frenchness. Clearly, they're done with outsiders after what happened with Fernando. Also, within France, it might be Paris and not Paris, but when it comes to the rest of the world, it's France and not France. Everyone else is just beneath them. They need Pierre or they're quitting. Just kidding. They're not going to quit, but they want Pierre. Who doesn't want Pierre? I'm pretty sure everyone wants Pierre. Right? Anyway. That concludes, on that note, that concludes our digital warm-up. On to the track walk. All right, let's talk about the Singapore Grand Prix. I'm so excited for this race. Also, is it basic of me to mention Crazy Rich Asians? It is, but I'll take the basic down a notch by referencing the books, not the movie. Although the movie was beautiful. The shots, the food, the clothes. Also, Michelle Yeoh was in it. And she is married to Franz Toast? Franz Toad? The previous FIA president? What's his name? Nope. Franz Toast is the AlphaTauri team principal. I am looking for former FIA president. No, that's not him. Jean Todt. Michelle Yeoh is married to Jean Todt and has attended several F1 races because she is actually Crazy Rich Asian in real life. Anyway, I want to talk about the book because the books were great. They were much less rom-com and much more like satirical social commentary, which is where I thrive. Nick and Rachel's love story was basically like a complete aside, and the plot was much more focused on the entire family and like society amongst the Asian elite. The author like came from that world, so it was like a really fun read. Rich people just existing is like one of my favorite genres. Anyway, I don't know what the point of this aside is other than that it is sadly the only cultural reference I can make to Singapore other than the food, and I do really want to visit Singapore for the food markets. So anyway, let's talk about the history of the Singapore Grand Prix. The circuit itself was built in 2008 and the inaugural race was held the same year. And that's it. That's the history. But we did have some of F1's most dramatic moments here. The infamous crash gate of 2008. The very first Singapore Grand Prix ever was when Fernando Alonso won for Renault from 15th. His teammate, Nelson Piquet Jr., yes, Max's girlfriend's brother, crashed earlier, which was viewed as like an intentional catalyst for Fernando's eventual win. Renault was accused of orchestrating the crash, though it was ignored originally and only began to be investigated like a year later when Renault decided to unceremoniously replace Piquet in the middle of the season, and he started making like a bunch of noise about how the crash was staged and he was forced to do all that. Anyway, spoiler alert, Renault was charged with conspiracy. Fabio Briatore, as well as the head of engineering, were both fired and banned from F1 for life, though that was later overturned. Classic. As long as they, get this, promised not to do it again. Okay. Classic. Anyway, that entire story has drama, mystery, intrigue, conspiracy, injustice. Everything, honestly, that you want from a great drama. But if you do want the full story, I did break it down last year in episode 13, which I believe is called Remembering Singapore 2008. I will link it in the show notes. But it's a great listen. It's a great story. Truly. Highly recommend. But also, my favorite story of all time happened during the same race when Felipe Massi was released too early by the Ferrari pit crew, and he drove halfway down the pit lane with the gasoline hose still sticking out of his car. Which, if F1 still refueled today, we know this would have happened to Charles or Carlos at least once by this point in the season. For sure. Without a doubt. If there was a hose that the Ferrari pit crew could stick into their car, they would do it. And they would leave it there. Truly. I will go one episode without shitting on Ferrari, I promise. One episode, I will not complain about them. Once they get their shit together. All right. Let's talk a bit about the Marina Bay circuit. Um, the Singapore Grand Prix is a nighttime race, and it's a city track, and it goes through like all the main Singapore attractions, so you can see like that like skyline with that boat on the buildings and like all the other cool stuff that Singapore is known for. It like they drive right through all that. Also, they pass under the grandstand at one point, which is fun. No one can see them, but that's fun for them. Probably look cool on TV. Not for the people in the grandstands. Also, this is one of the most physically demanding circuits on the calendar. The road is very bumpy, which you would think Singapore had enough money to smooth the roads out, but evidently not. There are also 23 corners in this race, which is a lot of corners. It is literally ziggy, 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 zag. I'm not sure that's how corners work, but you get the idea. Also, to add insult to injury, it is humid AF. It is so hot. It is so humid. So all of these things combined make this literally one of the most physically demanding races on the calendar. So what can you expect? Well, you can expect drama if previous Singapore races are anything to go by. There has been no shortage of the drama over the years, and I really hope we get some crazy F1 moments this year too. Also, in terms of weather, there is a pretty high chance of rain, which obviously has like got everyone all in a tizzy. Nothing makes an F1 fan cream their pants more than rain. Excuse my language, but really, they really get very excited about the rain. In terms of temperature, though, it's supposed to be mid to high 80s this weekend during the day, but at night it's gonna be like no higher than 80, like 78, 80, which is basically 25 degrees Celsius. This is like my first Singapore race, and like I said, I don't know much about it, but all I've heard is how difficult it is. Because it's so hot, and like drivers lose like 6 pounds during the race because they're sweating so much. But like, it's not even gonna hit 80. They've raced in hotter conditions than that. Is it because it's also like a very curvy track and the bumpy road and like all and it's humid, not like dry heat but humid, like all of this combined? Is that why it like people make such a big deal about Singapore? Because like it's not just the stories. Like if you've been on social media this week, you have seen the prep these drivers are going through to prepare their bodies for Singapore. It's like actually borderline comical. Like it really feels like the drivers all took their home gyms and relocated them into saunas, and they're just like working out in the sauna. Like Carlos was cycling in the sauna. Like Guan Yu was doing planks in the sauna. Like this is intense. By the way, like a lot of drivers posted about them working out in the sauna. Valtteri also posted sauna content, but he was just like chilling in his sauna naked as usual with like a reindeer hat on, drinking a beer. Which I guess counts as his training, though it was less physical and more naked in a sauna. He's ready. If he can do that in a sauna, he can do anything in Singapore. Truly. All right. Well, that sort of concludes the prep for the Singapore Grand Prix. And the Box F1 pit stop is back. And on the menu this week, I will be drinking boba in honor of Guan Yu and his helmet, and I will be making Singapore noodles. Honestly, I would love to do like a whole spread in honor of like the Singapore markets, but I will just have to settle for like one dish because I'm not gonna cook that much. But make sure to send me pics of what you're eating and drinking. If you get bubble tea, send me your bubble tea. By the way, I will not be making bubble tea. I will be ordering bubble tea. Got a couple faves. Also, another side note, I really hope that Yuki does a food crawl through Singapore food markets. That would be like dream content. That would be great. If him and Guan Yu go drink bubble tea together, I want Carlos there too. Carlos likes food. The three of them together drinking bubble tea and eating like some satay or some Singapore noodles would be my dream come true. Someone in F1 make that happen. I need them all to eat together. that's it for the Singapore Grand Prix. I'm so excited for this race. I will be getting up at 5 a.m. to watch it, so I don't actually know if I'll be excited in the moment, but I'm sure I'll be excited after because it'll just be drama and boba, my two favorite things. And as always, I'm leaving you with my very annoying request to like, review, and share the podcast with any potential boxes. I'll be eternally grateful. Anyway, see you soon. Box.